is found in every room where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah, and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset, and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Welcome to the Magic in the Room podcast. I'm Luke Freeman.
I'm Bob Schooley.
And I'm Hannah Bradderud. And we are so excited, Luke and I, today to have Bob Schooley, a recurring guest on this podcast. And so we're going to talk about the topic today is the leadership challenge. And we're going to talk about the 5 practices. Right. And Dr. Bob, you have so much experience both with this model and with really implementing these practices in organizations. So we're excited to dive into that.
Excellent.
Before we do that, we thought it would be fun to share our favorite memories from the time that we all met, which is over 10 years ago, in a graduate program called Organizational Dynamics, where you were Luke and I's professor,
right.
And you were also Chris's professor, who's our third musketeer. And so I'm going to ask you, Luke, first. What's your favorite, and we call our program Odine, what's your favorite Odine moment?
My favorite Odine moment? Well, I have a few, but the ones that I'm going to share today are in honor of Bob, since he's with us. So one is one of the things that I felt like I learned the most from the program, and I think I've told this story before, but we were in a strategy class that Bob was teaching, and we were going through different scenarios, and he would kind of set up and give us the case study, and we'd read it and then say, okay, what would you do? You know, this organization's in hot water, you know, how do we proceed? And I have always been a never give up person. You know, well, here's what we would do, and here's my plan, and I think it's genius, and we'll turn this ship around. And it didn't take long for me to figure out with these scenarios that Bob was giving that usually the right answer was like liquidate and move on and do something else. And I just really appreciated that because it was the first time that I think I felt permission in an organizational setting to say, like, sometimes, you know, we just need to say, like, the sunk costs, you know, we're never getting them back, and it's time to do something bold. And yeah, we could all work really hard for a long time and maybe have a 50-50 chance of turning something around, or maybe we just all need to find something better to do. So I just really appreciated that, Bob.
Yeah.
And then my other fun memory is a little bit less around what I learned and more of I'm going to share this one since Chris isn't here. You know, there was a saying in Odine that you can't spell Dr. Bob without a couple B's. And, you know, the program in general, you could generally do pretty well in most of the classes. A lot of it was around, like, do you collaborate? Do you do the basic reading? You know, no one was getting counted off for the little stuff, unless you're in Dr. Bob's class. And in that case, the details mattered. And so, you know, I heard this saying and I was terrified, you know, as a perfectionist and someone who had gone through the course up until this class with, you know, a 4.0 in graduate school. I felt pretty good about myself. And I'll have to say that in at least one of Dr. Bob's classes, I think out of the entire class, I was maybe one out of a couple people that pulled out an A. So I feel pretty good about that. I'll let you guess if Chris was also one of those people. He wasn't.
And I certainly wasn't.
And, you know, Hannah, you don't seem to mind.
I don't mind.
Chris does mind.
It's personal.
It's personal. He was like, Bob, we worked together. Then we get in the classroom and we're like, what happened? Yeah. So anyway, that's my fun Odine story with you, Bob. So
that's a good
one.
Yeah.
Well, and I will ask you the same question. I'll share my story because we probably have some of the same moments, lots of good moments to share. I didn't have that many classes with you, only a couple. And I didn't have that many classes with both you and Chris.
Mm-hmm.
But this particular class that you referred to was my first and one of the few that
really?
I had with you
Huh.
and with both Chris
I didn't
and
know
Luke.
that.
And I do remember that class. But my first experience with Dr. Bob as a professor was, and I'd heard great things about you from Chris, and you guys had worked together. And I remember you walking into the classroom, and you have this like charming way about you. You're smiling, you're making everybody feel comfortable. And then you had us line up against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to, without using words, we had to
that's right.
organize ourselves by date of birth. And I just remember that exercise, and it's one that I have used time and time and time again
That's cool.
in how to split up teams, right? How you count people out. Because what that did was, and I've used date of birth, and then I've morphed it into years or how long you've stayed with the company in a larger organization.
Cool.
Because then you get teams with some diversity and tenure, right? And so that was like this little aha moment. I was like, this is brilliant. And we all, we're able to communicate without using words, which is another topic I'm interested in is communication and body language. And then as the class progressed, I did learn that, Bob is spelled with a B. I think this particular class was the first one you taught in that program, and I have never worked that hard for a B in my entire academic career. This was a, 3 credit hour class in 3 weekends.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of work, and we were all working full time. But what I remember so well, though, is I remember that class, not just because I worked so hard, but because of some of the case studies that we read.
Yeah.
And twice already this week, the case study of Southwest Airline has come up in 2 different contexts.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know that story, and I remember reading that case in your class, and it made such a big impact. And again, something I've used over and over in my career as an example of an exemplary corporate culture and their focus on people and, putting employees first and so learned so much. I worked really hard for a B and retained probably more than in many other classes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that.
So thank you for putting us through the ringer.
Well, I would have to say my favorite thing about our experience at Odine, or at least my experience, was, I know it sounds silly to say, but I learned so much. The level of talent that was in those that were a part of that program was amazing. I loved the case study approach. That was very freeing for me. I'd been a college professor for probably 8-9 years, and that was the first time I'd ever been in that kind of format.
Yeah.
So, hats off to Brigitte and the students in that program were amazing.
Yeah.
I loved just going in and having debates and conversations, and just to hear you talk about sunk costs. I think that's awesome. That you need that's something we all need to be aware of and understand as a leader and in business. But I think for me, I've really my favorite Odine experience or memory is just how much I learned from those classes. And then, it was kind of fun too, just to see, some people that, you saw them literally blossom in front of you, and I think that's really a nice aspect of the design of that course, where there is so many opportunities to speak up and to get challenged and challenge others. And that was a really enjoyable period in my life. So, I mean, these are good memories you're bringing back.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so let's get into our topic today. And Dr. Bob, you're our resident expert on the leadership challenge and this model. And I know, Luke, you've worked with this model a lot as well. So Why don't you give us, Bob, just kind of a high-level overview
Sure.
of the model and
Okay.
the 5 practices?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you kind of the story of how I bumped into it a little bit.
Yeah,
and
please.
I know we've talked a little bit about this before. I think we've all been on a journey where we were looking for something to help us with our own leadership, but then also to help other people with what I would call their leadership journey.
Sure.
I was a professor at San Diego State University. I was in the College of Business, and I remember we got something. I think it was a flyer or something about a conference where people were invited to basically just share some of their current research that they were doing. You know, it hadn't been published yet. They were still kind of knocking the rough edges off of things. And that just looked really good. So I thought I'd go to that. And I remember kind of walking around and I saw these guys on the agenda. It was, the Leadership Challenge, Coos and Posner. And, and I just kind of looked at that and I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. So I kind of wander into this room and there were probably 5 or 6 people, and the Coos and Posner, who were professors I think they were at California Riverside.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. But so they started walking through the design of their research. And, we've talked a little bit about this. It was just so brilliant the way they approached it. They sat down with leaders and they said, what do you do when you're at your best? When you get your best results, what is it that you're doing as a leader? And then they turned around and they asked followers of leaders, what do you look for in a leader? What do they do that's important to you?
Yeah.
And what's really kind of interesting, I think, about those 2 fundamental questions is how much overlap there was between those 2. And those are what are referred to as the 5 practices, which we'll jump into in a little bit.
Yeah.
But what's kind of interesting, so you could just say kind of that by itself was a major finding, that they were able to identify, here are the 5 practices of an exemplary leader. And what I love too is they went into some detail on each of those 5.
Yeah.
So they give you 2 commitments for each of those practices, which I think are very helpful because they bring it alive basically. But okay, so that's an amazing finding and result. But then they went on and they shared some things. Now keep in mind, this is the 1980s. So it was a little bit different. The leadership genre of the day was, we were still kind of in that, what they called Theory X and Theory Y world. So when World War II ended, a lot of kind of our approach to leadership in business was based on how we led in the military.
Right.
And I'm not bashing it, and I think it's part of the way that you need to get things done in a certain environment. But it was known as kind of command and control. You take command, you tell people what to do, you stand over them. And there was another kind of theory out there. It was called Theory X, which was, your employees are going to try to slouch. They're going to try to get away with as little as they can and still get paid. They'll steal from you. They'll do all these bad things. So kind of that combination of kind of command and control and then Theory X, it was pretty rough. I mean, I had college professors that when we talked about leadership, that's the way they would frame it. Command and control.
Wow.
Theory X. And so what made it so amazing, the results that Coos and Posner got, was they came out and they said, hey, you know what? Anybody can be a leader. And man, that was kind of shocking right there, because people had these stereotypes of, in order to be an effective leader, you had to be of a certain gender, you had to be a certain height, all these ridiculous stuff, and they crushed that. They just said, no, anybody can be an effective leader. And we've got the research to prove it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that really, that kind of blew me away. And then their second thing they came out and said was, this whole idea that leaders are born and not developed, they totally blew that up as well too. They said, no, anybody can learn how to be an effective leader.
Yeah.
So those two, those 2 findings to me were just like, and I remember I was in this room and there's like 5 or 6 people, and 2 or 3 of us were probably listening to what they were saying, and I
Right.
kind of felt sorry for them. But man, I was just like, afterwards, I went up to them, shook their hand. I said, man, I feel like I've seen the Holy Grail or something.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny because they felt the same way. They knew that, and this was before they had published any of their results. So I think they knew that they had landed on something that was really, I mean, not to be too dramatic, but I mean, it was game changing,
Wow.
I think.
That's so awesome. And I love that takeaway about leadership is about behavior, and behavior can be learned
Yeah.
versus personality or something you're born with,
Exactly.
right? I mean, I hear that question still, are leaders born or made? We even tell kids sometimes, you were born a leader, and is that really doing them a favor, right? If you had a growth mindset, you would talk about the behavior that would, give you the ability to become a great leader, and the hard work and the effort that you put into it, right? And so this really, for me, looks at leadership from a growth mindset of everyone can learn the behaviors that it takes to be an effective leader. We see it in sales too. Our salespeople, born or made, if you're not born to be a salesperson, if you don't have the right personality, you're not really a salesperson. Well, I do think, yes, there are some personality types that lend themselves to certain types of behaviors or certain types of professions, right? And so there's talent, and then there's skill. And I do think you can have leadership talent, you can have sales talent, but without building the skill, the talent isn't going to get as far, and vice versa. If you can build the skill when you also have talent, you can get really far. But I think the lesson for all of us and the people we work with is we can learn to become better leaders, and we don't start out being a great leader, even if we have natural raw talent, even if we, show some early signs of leadership practices without building that skill. We're gonna fail. We're gonna suck at it for a while. And we have to practice. So, Luke, I'd love to hear kind of your take and your experience with this research and this way of teaching leadership.
Yeah, and I really have to give credit to Bob in introducing me to this and into the idea of viewing leadership as a practice. I mean, my entire career, I've been interested in leadership and designing leadership training programs and coaching folks and helping folks become better leaders. And even being interested in leadership and looking at the research on leadership, there's all kinds of stuff out there.
Yeah.
And the problem with leadership to me is that everyone knows what it is they think, right? If you say, hey, what's a leader? Tell me what a leader is, who's a great leader you've had. People will usually have some idea around that. They also know what bad leadership looks like. So people have this gut of, well, this person, I don't want to work for them, or I didn't like them being my coach, or I didn't like being in their class, or whatever it was. And this person I do kind of like, but no one has really been able to, and just in conversation with people, boil it down to like, what are those things that make a leader? And so for me, running into this material and learning it from Bob, it's really clarified for me, if I was going to start from square one with somebody and say, what are the behaviors that you would practice to become a leader? Here's an answer. It's based on research. It's based on more than me going to coffee with someone and saying, well, what do you think leadership is? Well, I think it's this or that or whatever. We actually kind of know, based on this research, what most people resonate with when it comes to what behaviors are effective and what behaviors are not effective from leaders.
And what's kind of interesting too is not only do people respond to that, but then the results that come out of that, someone being an exemplary leader, the level of engagement, the level of productivity, the level of innovation. They've got a lot of data to support that. If you've got a leadership team that is practicing these 5 behaviors, odds are you're going to be doing really well on some key metrics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we keep talking about these practices.
Mm-hmm.
What are they?
Yeah. I think, well, let's start first with model the way.
Okay.
And what basically that boils down to is trust. You know, and when they talk to leaders about when were you at your best, is when they invested the time to earn and build and sustain trust. And it's really easy to blow right by that one. You know, especially back in those times when it basically, hey, I'm the boss. I have the title. So what I say goes. You know, it's kind of that whole command and control.
Yeah.
So the thought of, hey, I've got to sit down with my team and I've got to earn their trust. And what's kind of really cool about, I think, earning the trust is we have to find our own voice. We have to be authentic. I can't look at some other leader and try to be that leader. I've got to be my own leader based on my values, my purpose, and what I want to contribute. So to me, I was kind of hooked with Model the Way, to be honest with you, because I believe that probably most of my life about if you're going to be a good leader, you've got to be able to earn and sustain people's trust.
Yeah, we were having a conversation before we started recording about authenticity and what is that. And the idea that was shared was that really resonated with me was that when the story I'm telling verbally lines up with the story of my life, behavior, whatever that people can observe, then I come across as authentic.
Yeah.
And I think when you go back to command and control or theory X, you know, people did have a pass in some ways to say, well, what I say goes, do as I say, not as I do. But what we found is that just isn't as effective at delivering results and building trust with people. And so for me, you know, modeling the way is just getting really clear about who am I? What do I believe? What are my day-to-day behaviors? And how do I lean into those being authentic and aligning with my words and the narrative that's coming out of my mouth? And when it does align, I kind of get that trust bank starting to fill up.
Yeah.
I have to be careful because as an off-the-chart introvert, I think I'm really biased towards modeling the way because that really speaks to me. I've never been a rah-rah guy, you know, where you go in and you give the big pep talks and you know, I've always been, I want my actions to speak for me. I want my behavior or my commitments. So to me, modeling the way really brought that all home and really kind of, for me, helped me understand that's very important. Because, you know, what is it, Hannah? You probably know this data a lot better than I do, but I think it's like 70 to 80% of what people hear from us is not our words. It's what they see in our actions and our behavior.
Absolutely, yeah. The whole, you know, how do you break down a message, what's being communicated? Yeah, and you can put, and there's been, you know, some studies on that of what people really hear or what they pick up from a message, and only about 7% of that are the actual words.
Wow.
You know, the content of what's being said. 38% is your voice tone and inflection and energy in your voice. So really the emotion that comes through your voice. And then the rest, like 55% or whatever it is, more than half is your body language, right? And so we trust what we see more than what we hear.
Yeah.
And so if your face says one thing and your words say something else, I'm going to instinctively, whether I'm aware of it or not, I'm going to trust what I see on your face or the way you hold your body, right? And that can be tricky if we're insecure or, you know, that's part of modeling the way is to some extent you have to also model confidence, right? Because people will pick up on fear, insecurity, uncertainty, and that can also be misinterpreted very often, right? And based on how we project our energy.
Yeah, I love that point because, you know, one thing that we talk to folks about as we're coaching them through this material is you have to be clear about what you believe. What are your own personal values? How do you want to show up as a leader? Because if you lack clarity on that, those mixed messages are going to come through.
Yeah.
And so you have to do some internal work first to get clarity on these things if you're going to be as effective as you could be at modeling the way.
Yeah. And they're very clear in that in Model the Way, you're earning that credibility, or you're displaying the credibility. And without that, it's really a non-starter.
Yeah. So what's the next practice? We start with modeling the way.
Yeah. And then inspiring a shared vision, which to me is kind of another very interesting concept, the word shared. You know, I a lot of the leadership work I had done prior to that, it really kind of made it sound like, you know, as a leader, you've got to come up with the vision.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of reminded me of Moses going up on the mountain. You know, it just it doesn't work that way. And the idea of a shared vision where you've got to work with your team and find out what are our shared aspirations? What do we all want to be a part of? What do we want to see happen? And again, you know, a lot of times you're under a lot of pressure as a leader. It is really easy to blow through these first two and just kind of say, okay, I'm in charge. Here's the mountain we're going to go climb. And I don't spend any time socializing that vision or getting any kind of commitment or ownership. And that's why I think a lot of change initiatives fail, and not only fail, but fail miserably. So I really think these guys nailed it. And again, you know, these were leaders at their best, what they do, and then what people look for. So it's pretty cool how those kind of fell out like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that sometimes it's such a mountain to climb to convince leaders that it really is truly a shared vision, and that the expectation should not be on their shoulders to come up with a vision.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting the other day where you had an executive leader meeting with kind of a task team that was going to be working on a strategic initiative. And one of the members of the task team laid out this plan and then kind of this roadmap of how we think we can execute this project and this task. And what I saw happen over about a 10 or 15 minute period of time is that the senior leader essentially absorbed all of those talking points and then recommunicated them back out to that small group as if they were the leader's vision and a directive on here's where we need to go, here's what we need to do. And I was, you know, on the call and trying to participate and trying to figure out how to shape this thing. But I was just thinking in the back of my mind, as a leader, you are giving up so much opportunity. You could just say, that's an amazing plan. How does everyone else feel about that? Thank you for bringing, you know, this next steps up for us.
Yeah.
How can I help support us making that happen? And not feel the need to like say it again in your own words and all of those things. But I feel like a lot of leaders think that's their responsibility, that they're not doing their job if they don't take ownership of, well, you do this and you do this, and here's what I'm going to do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. Just the whole part about inspiring a shared vision, right? We've had some conversation earlier today about inspiring people and stories that inspire and stories of courage are a way to inspire people, because deep down we all want to be that courageous person who shows courage in the face of adversity. And a leader can, you know, an exemplary leader can inspire that in us, right? To want to achieve this shared vision where we all feel part of it. We all get to be courageous in stepping up and stepping forward and taking on new responsibilities and, you know, helping to pave the way towards this future vision.
That's a great point too, Hannah. And a lot of people, when they ask them, what do you want from a leader? They said, I want someone that's going to bring out my best. And I want to be around someone where we're working on something that's important and I'm contributing to that. So that's a great point.
Right. So we've inspired a shared vision. Now we just march on, right?
Yeah. Well,
status quo. We just we got it. We're there.
We're off to a great start. And I love their third practice, which is challenge the process, which really, a lot of times disruptive change or a big change, you're going to have to challenge some existing processes and procedures. Not an easy thing to do. But to me, this is where they start, the whole idea of just making that a possibility. That's very empowering when you hear someone say, hey, what are we currently doing that perhaps we need to adjust or tweak? So I love this part of the model. I think it's critical. And I like the fact that they dedicated some quality time to, hey, you've got to help people understand or kind of accept that empowerment if you're going to get to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, to me, whenever I think about challenging the process, I think one of the things that a leader is signaling whenever they challenge the process in the presence of their team or their peers even, is they're signaling that their relationship to the powers that be is that they are not afraid to question the status quo.
Right.
And I think what it kind of telegraphs and signals to everyone who's connected to that type of leader is that we don't have to worry about power dynamics and politics here as much as we have to maybe in some other places or experiences or whatever. And so I think just that act of challenging the process, being willing to go to bat for the team, being willing to say, I think we've not been doing this in the best way possible. There's some new things that we need to try, and let's be a leader inside our organization. Let our team lead changing some of these processes or change how we do things. I think it really does just give people almost a security to innovate and feel like they can then be creative. Whether they are or not. Not everyone's an innovator, not everyone's a creative, but I think knowing that if I have an idea, I can talk about it. It opens the door to people really being able to engage with that leader.
And for a couple of our clients, what I've seen is that's really a tipping point. When you get to the point to where people feel comfortable sharing feedback and insights about what might be sacred cows, wow, it's just some amazing stuff starts happening.
So we're looking for opportunities to challenge the status quo and to challenge the process. Look for innovative ways to always improve the organization. I mean, that's a role that you play on our team, Luke. You're always looking for, what can we do to be better? And you're always challenging assumptions of, but we just started this thing. It's not going to be perfect. And you're like, it can be better. It can be better. What can we do to make it better, right? And we appreciate that. And that's part of...
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, we don't always appreciate it right in that moment, but we always appreciate the outcomes of, making us better, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, though, like, playing the thorn in the side role, in pretty much every role that I've been in professionally, I think being in a place where a leader is open to that and asks for it is a game changer. And when you think about the talent on your team, you have to think about who here is outside of the bell curve of normal, the way they view the world, their thinking style, like how they do their work. And how do I make a place here so that the people who are on those tails of the bell curve can really bring that diversity of thought to everyone else on the team and make this team better? And for a leader that challenges the process, I mean, I think it enables those people to act. It's the dynamics and the level of success of that team generally are going to be significantly higher.
And, we know and we talk a lot about this, right, to create the kind of culture where people feel free to innovate and bring their best ideas and try new things. We know that, taking risks is going to involve mistakes, sometimes failures, and being the kind of leader that challenges the process, yet accepts that, people, if I want people to try their best, it's not always going to be perfect. And sometimes some things are going to slip, and we still create that supportive environment. And I think that kind of leads us into the next practice, right?
Yeah. enabling others to act. I mean, that really what we just said about kind of empowering people, but then also supporting those people.
Yeah.
And when we try something and it doesn't work, you know, that there's some great chapters in the book about just kind of the whole idea of, you know, there are no mistakes, they're just learning opportunities. They keep talking about that as far as what do we learn, and then they encourage people to experiment.
Right.
You know, but experiment within reason.
Right.
But all, you know, and just that's so freeing to someone when they feel like, hey, I'm trusted. They value kind of what I'm interested in, and I have a chance to help us get to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Just creating that spirit of collaboration, and I love this term, building spirited teams, you know, where you can have debate, you can have healthy conflict, but everybody feels empowered to act.
Yeah, and I think that act word, you know, I know it's not on accident that it's in this practice. It's not just enabling people to be engaged or enabling people to be fulfilled at work or enabling people to have open conversations. It's enabling people to act. And if we miss that action orientedness, I think we miss out. You know, for a leader to be effective, for a team to be effective, they need to be doing stuff. They need to be changing things. They need to be going somewhere. And a leader who is friendly and nice, you know, I've run into a few of these folks too, nicest people in the world, you know, have a great conversation. You want to go out and have coffee with them, but they're hesitant to actually do anything that's different than their normal business as usual day to day. And over time, that's going to hamstring the effectiveness of that team, and it's going to start shedding talent.
And you know, I don't know which came first, but to me, this was the first time I heard kind of this concept of servant leadership, which really kind of spoke to me. I mean, that was just really powerful. And you know, there's a quote, and I think it's in these chapters. They say something to the effect of, "If serving is beneath you, then perhaps leadership is beyond you."
Yeah, right.
And wow, I remember reading that in the book, and you know, I had to go back and read that again, and then I wrote it down, and I was just like, wow, if serving is beneath you, then perhaps leadership is beyond you. And that really, and again, I don't mean to kind of, I know we've talked about this, but just that really kind of broke out of the norm. And just this, again, kind of the whole concept of servant leadership.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, we talk a lot about defaulting to action as one of the EQ practices or EQ discoveries that we talk about in our Unlocking EQ curriculum and series. And so I think, just involving everybody, making people feel strong and powerful. And that word power is one we often shy away from, but having that sense of personal power to be able to do something, a good leader will instill that, right? Where we talked about engagement in an earlier episode and how, you know, leaders can either foster engagement or stifle engagement, and an exemplary leader will enable others to act.
And you know, power, I think, and there's so much around power with this enabling thing. I think, are you a leader who's a power capacitor? So in other words, everything that flows into you, you store until you have to use it for a big change initiative or whatever? Or are you a leader who is a transformer? When power flows into you, you adjust it, flow it out in a more powerful way to the people on your team. You know, are you truly empowering them and not being that reservoir that soaks up and holds close to you all the power you can?
Yeah, it's a little bit like Liz Wiseman wrote a book called Multipliers, and it's this concept of intelligence and, you know, being kind of enamored of intelligence, and that some leaders are really enamored of their own intelligence and want to be the smartest people, and the people in their organizations tend to become less smart, right? And then you have the multiplier kind of leader that actually multiplies intelligence and makes others smarter, and others feel smarter and acts in smarter and
Yeah.
more intelligent ways
Mhm.
because of that. Being able to not hog all the power and the intelligence to use it to make yourself look better,
Mhm.
but to allow it to flow through you as energy that others can
Yeah.
use and for their own empowerment.
That's
Yeah.
cool. That's cool.
So I think that's a good segue then to the final
Yeah,
practice.
the final practice, encourage the heart.
Yeah.
And for me, this was really helpful because this is where I started to learn more about meaningful recognition.
Mm-hmm.
I did a poor job in recognition. I was just kind of, I would say thank you and hey, that was a great job, but that was so shallow and so superficial. And I think kind of digging in and doing a deep dive into their aspect of, and I love the fact that they say encourage the heart, and being very specific, timely, knowing how people like to be recognized and meeting that. Again, it's kind of, I love the title they use for this book, The Leadership Challenge, because to do these 5 things, I think are extremely difficult at times. And there's always going to be 1 or 2 of these that are a little bit challenging for most of us.
Right.
Yeah.
But I love that the fact that they have this in there, and it's the whole idea of, when you see someone, living and being their best and challenging the process and doing great stuff out there, call it out. And we just had a chance to sit in on a session around stories.
Yeah.
And I think Kuz and Posner basically were saying, hey, tell those stories.
Yeah.
And that story is going to help you reinforce the kind of behavior and the kind of purpose-driven work that you're looking for. So I think it's kind of brilliant. But again, that's, leaders will tell you that these exemplary leaders, they basically said, hey, I just felt so good about what we were doing, and I wanted to make sure everyone felt kind of that degree of satisfaction and accomplishment.
And it's that whole thing of just making people feel like heroes. We talk about our partners at MTM, who is the recognition provider, recognition company, and they talk about meaningful recognition. And one of their core tenets is to celebrate champions. And champions are not just in sports; they're in every day, everywhere around us, looking for the champions.
Yeah.
And, we talked about recognition and meaningful recognition on an earlier episode. And one of the things that came to mind when we talk about making people feel seen, and heard and understood. And I'm going to pull out another favorite Bob moment that I remember so well. And this was, when I had that class with you that we talked about earlier, was pretty early in this graduate program for me.
Right.
I was in a role as an individual contributor in a sales organization, and I knew I was ready for the next thing. I didn't necessarily know what it was. I didn't necessarily feel like the people around me in that organization recognized the skills that I had, because I felt like what I was doing was like I could do more, right? And part of that reason was why I was in this program. And I remember meeting you and not knowing you very long, Bob, and you said, you're a leader and you could lead a practice. Maybe not just yet, but very soon you'll be at a point where you can lead a whole practice within an organization. And that just gave me such a boost of confidence that somebody outside recognized that, because I felt like I could, but I needed that external validation to be courageous enough to step up and act on that. And I think just having that courage from someone recognizing me in that way helped me be bolder as I, stepped out in my career.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, that's a great segue, because I'm really curious, if we could either give each other feedback or if we want to own it ourselves. I mean, which of these 5 practices do you feel like is your super strength, your superpower as a leader? And then are there some of these that you have to be really intentional around? And I say segue because, Bob, I think encouraging the heart is one of your superpowers. And I'm curious, you mentioned earlier, you felt like you didn't used to do a good job at that. But I know for me, day in and day out, I see you as an encourager.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. It's something I had to work on. And I have to remind myself daily to focus on that. So, Chris likes to use the words intentional. And I don't know, I think when I bumped into this, I was probably 30 years old. And I really don't know that I was very inward. I would acknowledge people, but it was very superficial. It was kind of a check the box type of thing for me as a leader. And then when I read this material and what people look for in a leader, it really was eye-opening to me, and I was convicted, I was guilty. And then I've also I'm kind of a people watcher when it comes to recognition and being meaningful. And, I learned a lot from other people, and it's something I have to work on. So yeah, I would agree. I think it's gotten to the point now to where I really enjoy doing that, and it's kind of deep in my heart as far as, because the story you just shared kind of makes my day about, I'm really looking for opportunities to encourage people, because I think it's pretty tough out there. There's a lot of stuff we're battling right now, and if I can just give them that one thing that helps them go, yeah, I can do this, then to me that's a big win. Yeah. How about you guys? What's your superpower?
I mean, the one that's the easiest for me is encouraging the heart,
Is
right?
it?
Yes. And I'm, one of my top love languages is words of affirmation.
Okay.
So that means that's what I appreciate hearing, and that's what is most easy for me to give, right? And so I do feel like I'm an encourager, and that comes naturally for me. I think the one maybe that I struggle with more is, and this one is a little bit of a double-edged sword, the modeling the way, because I have, my father was a pioneer in a lot of different ways, and I have that pioneering spirit where I am not afraid to be the first to try something. Usually, it depends on what it is, but I am often willing to step out in a complete unknown territory and just kind of feel my way through. So that means I don't necessarily have a good practice to model, right? Because I'm just figuring it out myself. And so am I modeling the way? Maybe I'm modeling the way in having courage and trying something new, but am I modeling the best way to do something? Probably not, right? And so that takes iteration, and that takes practice, and to build that within the team, takes repetition and being able to do it over and over. So when you're always doing something new for the first time, you're not always, others come behind you and do it much better. And often they're the ones who get the accolades. I saw my dad's whole life being that way, right? He was the first to do it and got a lot of flack for a lot of the things that he did. And then others came along and did it really well. However, they would not have done that had he not been first, right? And so that one is one that I struggle with, right? Do I model the right way, or do I just model a way?
Yeah, that's good.
What about you, Luke?
Oh, I think for me, inspire a shared vision is probably the thing that I feel like comes most naturally. I always have cared about inclusivity and including people. I've always cared about what's on the horizon, and I want to align people and move them there. So, we're recording this in downtown Tulsa today. We also, right before we recorded this, went over and looked at an office space, a new office space for our team. We're excited about it. We like the location. We like the collaboration opportunity there. And, as we left, Bob, I think you were one of the people I talked to. I kind of made a point to, I want to go kind of get one-on-one feedback from different members of our team to say, hey, what do you think? Is this a good fit for us? is this the direction we want to go? And I wasn't even consciously thinking about inspiring a shared vision, but for me, doing those things comes naturally to say, I want to know, is our team aligned?
Yeah.
Is this something we're all excited about? Or is this something we're all just kind of like, yeah, okay, it's the next thing, let's go along with it. I want it to be inspiring and for us all to buy in and stack hands. I would say the thing that doesn't come as naturally to me, and I've tried to be intentional about it, especially the last couple of years, is encouraging the heart. I am someone who sometimes gets uncomfortable receiving encouragement. And I think for a lot of my life and journey as a leader, I assumed that those feelings of kind of awkwardness or like, aw shucks, don't say that. I don't want any limelight for just doing my job or doing this thing well or whatever. I think I assumed that those feelings meant that I shouldn't do it or that it wasn't important, at least to other people. But what I found is that since I've been learning more about meaningful recognition and encouragement and actually calling out people's character and looking for opportunities to do it, I feel like I've come a ways on it, but definitely still have a ways to go in just practicing it and leaning into those conversations.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hey,
I think.
and just one quick it's kind of interesting that you go through the book and then there's a chapter 13, which is the last chapter.
Right.
And I hate to be what do you call that when you ruin a movie
Spoiler.
for a spoiler alert? So maybe
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. You might want. But it is so cool because they go through the 5 practices and then there's commitments for each one and they've got great examples, kind of case studies throughout the book. But then in this chapter 13, they wrap it up and they say, leadership, you really can't think your way to leadership. And they go as far as to say, from their experience and everyone they've talked to, leaders and followers, and now keep in mind, this is 35 years of data. They have kept asking those questions for the last 35 years, and the 5 practices have pretty much stayed intact.
Yeah.
And the commitments as well, which kind of shocked me, to be honest with you. I thought as much change as we've gone through that you would see some shuffling around. It hasn't changed. But what they kind of close the book with is that, okay, you can't think your way to leadership. Leadership is an affair of the heart. It truly is loving what you do and loving the people around you.
Yeah. Wow.
And they basically said, hey, if you want to be a successful leader, that's a requirement. And if you can't do that, if you can't say, then it's time probably to look for something else. But I thought that was kind of fascinating. At the end of the book, they shared that.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a really great note to close on. Leadership is an affair of the heart, and we have to love people.
Yeah.
And I certainly love both of you and our team and being part of, we're spending some time in person with several of our team members today. We're often dispersed in different parts of the country. And, to me, it encourages my heart when I get to work alongside all of, both of you and the rest of our team. And, Dr. Bob, who was our teacher and our professor and encourager and role model and mentor and coach, now to get to work alongside you as a colleague and do this meaningful work together. That is definitely close to my heart.
Me too.
Yeah, it is a privilege and an honor.
Well,
and I'm grateful, Bob.
Thank you, guys. Me too. It's an honor.
Well, have a great day.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about the Leadership Challenge, you can search for the Leadership Challenge. You can also find blogs and I'm written by Dr. Bob on our website, purposeandperformancegroup.com. Also, we love to help organizations implement these practices, help individual leaders implement these practices, and they truly are a practice. Behaviors will yield results. And if you're interested in learning more about that, coaching, programs, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you.
If you liked what you heard today, there's a lot more on our website, purposeandperformancegroup.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast by hitting the subscribe button so you get notified of every new episode and video that we produce.